You awoke, shrouded in the cold shadow of the funerary chamber, where the scent of aged papyrus and sticky resin lingered in the still air. The rough stone floor pressed into your knees as you knelt before the dark wooden sarcophagus, the silent weight of centuries settling heavily across your weary shoulders. The task before you, repeated countless times, was as silent as it was essential. To perform the ritual of opening the mummy's mouth, a seemingly simple gesture that held a dark and absolute power. With trembling fingers, you grasped the worn tools, small stones and stakes, ever mindful of the ceremony's rigor and precision. The faint jingle of distant temple bells echoed softly, a persistent reminder of the unyielding cycle of duty. As you slowly shifted the petrified jaw, a rough sound broke the ancient stillness. The tasks that followed were precise rituals, carried out with monotonous repetition, rubbing the dry face with an oily mixture, chanting words you barely understood, every movement steeped in the same quiet resignation that filled the surrounding space. You drew a deep breath of heavy incense and sand, knowing that this small opening granted might be the key to something far greater, or to a silent death. The silence inside the chamber was different, a heavy, rosy background that drew you deep from heavy incense. Here in the chamber, the silence inside the chamber was different, a heavy, unfolding quiet, across with heat. The silence inside the chamber was different, a heavy, unfolding quiet, across with heat, expanding into things that never come to any of us. For this childlike intimacy will continue for thousands of years until it seeks awakening and healing from death, unsuppressing, held in ancient dustiness. The faint but relentless odor of decay mingled with the sweet tang of resin and earth. Your fingertips tingled as they traced the smooth edge of the sarcophagus, the grain of wood worn by endless hands like yours. The dull scrape of your tools against stone and bone echoed faintly, a low rhythm in the oppressive quiet. Each motion was deliberate and slow, adjusting the angle of a tiny pick, pressing gently against stiffened flesh. Careful not to disrupt the fragile silence, you felt the tension coil lightly beneath your skin, the weight of unseen eyes watching in the shadows, perhaps memories of those who once walked these halls. Outside the chamber, the faint rustle of linen and the whisper of others preparing subtly shifted the atmosphere. A soft rustle, a catch-in breath, the near hush of a dog's bark fading abruptly, an undercurrent of tension that wove itself into your careful, measured movements. Memories of the outside world drifted for a moment. How today a dead phone battery might cause frustration or impatience. But here, your focus endured on moments extraordinarily stretched, where a single breath held weight and each cautious step was a world in itself. You rubbed the dried ointment again, its oily scent, heavy and slow to disperse, smelling of time itself. The ritual pressed on, your fingers steady, despite the subtle trembling that spoke of your growing awareness of the power in this act. The mouth, once sealed tight for ages, now opened a fraction wider. A small key turned slowly in the lock of time, releasing a quiet door to secrets and shadows. Suddenly, the subtle sounds fell away. The distant bells ceased, and the soft breathing beyond the chamber hushed into an eerie stillness. Shadows lengthened, stretching like dark fingers along the walls, and you felt an indistinct yet compelling shift in the air. A breath held in the throat of time, a silent command poised at the edge of realization. You paused, fingers frozen, sensing the chamber itself waiting. Before the next chapter unfolds, make sure you stay on this path. Hey, before Morpheus takes you fully, check quickly if you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappeared, and I don't want you to miss the next sleep stories. Take a soft like, as gentle as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this calm corner alive. Thanks for being part of it. You remained motionless, the faint shift of the jaw sending a tremor through the thick silence. Every breath you took felt precious, measured against the vast stillness that surrounded you. The dim light caressed the faded hieroglyphs, as if coaxing shadows to whisper forgotten secrets, and you found your fingers lingering over the sarcophagus surface, tracing the somber grooves carved by hands long vanished into dust. The chamber seemed suspended in time, the weight of countless rituals pressing gently but insistently against your skin. A subtle breeze swirled through the narrow slits, carrying dry, dusty grains that kissed your face like ancient, whispered regrets. You felt the chill crawl along your forearms, curling softly beneath the coarse linen of your sleeves. The reminder of the desert's eternal embrace was a cold one, both cruel and familiar. Your heart beat with slow resolve, a steady pulse beneath the layers of worn rituals and silent prayers. You dared not speak, not aloud. Your voice would only fracture the fragile balance that held the shadows. At bay, with a deliberate slowness, your hand lifted the small, aged cup, a vessel of oil thick and darkened with time. The scent hit you before the sight, a deep earthiness mingled with faint hints of myrrh, a perfume preserved through centuries. You dipped your fingers gingerly, the sticky liquid coating your skin in a heavy warmth that contrasted harshly with the chamber's chill. Your hands moved with care, as if each motion carved a thread of ancient magic into the tapestry of the air. Slowly, you began to rub the oily mixture onto the mummy's cracked lips and brittle cheeks. The resistance of dried flesh beneath your touch was paradoxically both fragile and relentless. As your fingers glided, the smell of resin thickened, invading your senses. The quiet scrape of your touch was met only by your own steady breathing, a rhythm intertwined with the pulse of the opal light fading around you. Time expanded, stretching out like the ever-present sands outside, where every grain was part of a vast continuum you momentarily escaped but could not deny. Your mind wandered briefly to the distant hum of the temple beyond the stone walls. Quiet footsteps, muffled and deliberate, traced patterns on ancient stone flooring. There was a faint murmur, a chant perhaps, woven into the air like a thread just beyond hearing. You noticed how those sounds seemed miles away, yet remained tethered to this place through invisible strands of history. A fragile connection between the living and the dead. You inhaled deeply, the air thick with dust and incense, and exhaled slowly, feeling the hours expand into endless moments. The ritual demanded patience, endless patience. You found your gaze drifting to the faint smear of ochre and gold that still clung stubbornly to the sarcophagus's carved surface. The colors, now muted and fractured, hummed with an ineffable weight, as if holding the soul of a forgotten king in their fading glow. Your fingertips traced the chipped paint, the minute cracks that revealed layers of age, and with every touch, a small shiver passed along your spine. The walls tightened their embrace, closing you deeper into this liminal space between life and death. Suddenly, a shift stirred the air, a low murmur, barely audible at first, but growing with careful subtlety. The distant temple bells resumed their tolling, irregular and hesitant, as though time itself hesitated with each chime. A fragile fragrance rose, a hint of warm sand heated by the first sun, mingling with the persistent scent of resin. You found your hands raised again, adjusting the delicate tools with trembling precision. The rhythm of your movements became a slow pulse. Dip, rub, trace, dip, rub, trace. Each cycle a thread woven into the night's unseen fabric. You caught yourself, pausing, the silence turning almost tactile, as if the chamber's very breath held you captive. It was here, in this suspended moment, that your attention snapped sharply to the softest of sounds. A barely perceptible shift behind the door you had sealed hours before. A whisper of movement, almost a sigh, a fragile shifting of fabric against stone. The hairs at the nape of your neck prickled with a long-dulled caution, and yet curiosity curled around the edges of your fatigue. You pressed your palm to the cold wall beside the sarcophagus, feeling the uneven texture of sandstone cool and rough beneath your skin. The ancient stone seemed to hum with a quiet expectancy, vibrating faintly through your flesh. Your breath hitched, slow and measured, your fingers tightening around the wooden beam of the sarcophagus, feeling the grain deepen under your grip. The narrow rays of dawn had faded almost completely, swallowed by the gathering shadows that crept inward and upward, pooling like ink in the corners. Outside, the faint rustling of linen had grown more distinct. A scent brushed past, the ghost of saffron and pepper, mingling with the sharper tang of sweat and earth. You imagined figures moving just beyond reach, rituals continuing in distant chambers, their murmurs weaving into the tapestry of time around you. Yet here, within these stone walls and fading light, you stood alone, with the weight of secret rites and the fragile barrier you had begun to undo. The jaw creaked now with an ominous slowness, a hinge turning beneath centuries of silence. You felt a cool exhale brush against your cheek, like the breath of a long-held dream, fading toward waking. Your eyes traced the shadowed contours of the mummy's face, where cracked gilding caught the last glimmer of light. The faint flicker of something unseen stirred deep within. An almost imperceptible pulse, a tremor beneath the surface, as if the sarcophagus itself held a silent, ancient breath. You stilled, every sense sharpened, attuned to the growing quiet within the chamber. This moment was not the end, but the fragile threshold of something vast and unspoken, waiting just beyond the fragile opening you had coaxed. The shadows pressed closer, dense and patient, their dark fingers creeping just around the edge of the dim light. And in that near darkness, you swore you glimpsed a movement, subtle, impossible to pin down, a flicker of something other than stone and dust, watching you with eyes that belonged to the grave. The air grew colder still, the incense thickening into a slow, heavy fog that wrapped around your skin and seeped into your bones. Your hand hesitated at the edge of the sarcophagus, the final touch lingering between centuries of stillness and the fragile breath of awakening. And then, breathing barely above a whisper, the chamber exhaled with you, and the world outside waited, silent and expectant, on the brink of something that could not yet be named. You remained rooted in the dim chamber, every breath, caught between the shifting shadows and the weight of silence. The jaw you coaxed open groaned slowly like a long-forgotten hinge, finally stirred, the raw creak of wood meeting bone, pressing deep into your ears. Your fingertips hovered a moment longer over the cracked lips, feeling the brittle edge tremble beneath your touch, brittle as a dried petal clinging to a withered stem. The scent of resin intensified, thick and clinging, pulling the past and present into a single dense fog that clouded your senses and slowed time's relentless flow. Cold dust swirled gently in the narrow shafts of light, twisting like ancient ghosts caught in slow dance. The air trembled, heavy with something unseen, waiting beyond the fragile curtain you had begun to lift. A faint pulse, almost too delicate to perceive, rippled beneath your skin, entwining with the steady but slow thud of your heart, your gaze fixed on the faint gold leaf shimmering beneath the decay, as if an abyss of stories waited silently behind the faded hieroglyphs, tempting your curiosity and caution in equal measure. Your hand steadied and reached for the cloth bundle beside you. The rough linen, worn thin by centuries, whispered softness against your fingertips, a stark contrast to the harsh stone pressing into your knees. Slowly, with measured care, you traced the surface of the carefully folded cloth, its fabric dry and warm from the lingering heat of lamps long extinguished. The ritual demanded this slow reverence, a dance with time itself, and you obeyed, savoring each motion as a thread pulling you closer into the clandestine heart of this quiet mystery. Behind you, the muffled sounds of the temple shifted, an irregular murmur, the faint scrape of sandals across cold stone, all swallowed quickly by the dense stone walls. You swallowed hard, the chill of the air curling deep into your lungs with each breath, mingling with the stale perfume of incense and earth. Your fingers, slippery with oil and dust, lingered briefly on the wooden edge, bookending the sharp boundary between the living and the silent eternity you invited forth. The chamber seemed to pulse with a slow, breathing life of its own. Shadows stretched and recoiled, playing over your skin like whispered warnings. With a deliberate, almost tender rhythm, you lifted the small curved blade again. Its edge was dull but sacred, a slow-moving scalpel meant not for harm, but for unlocking the secrets carved into flesh and bone. As you traced the rim of the open mouth, gentle pressure caressed the dry, cracked surfaces, coaxing and urging without haste. The sound of your heartbeat echoed faintly in your ears, a steady drum beneath layers of breath and silence. The incense smoke curled lazily upward, a spiral caught in the dim light, its scent a mingling of musk and forgotten time. You watched it drift, mesmerized by the slowness of its ascent, a counterweight to the unrest flickering just beyond the door. A delicate shiver traced down your spine as the air shifted again, just a whisper of movement, a fleeting rustle of ancient linen teasing at the edges of your awareness. The sensation was not quite fear, but an alertness smoldering in quiet embers. You lowered the blade and picked up the bowl of oil once more, thick and dark, like liquid memory. Each dip of your fingers into the viscous mixture was slow, almost ritualistic, coating your skin in warmth that contrasted the biting chill around you. The first touch to the trembling lips was hesitant, reverent. The lips parted, cracked channels catching the oily sheen, glistening faintly under the wavering light. You moved deliberately, the slow massage of extinction itself, threading patience and presence through each tender stroke. The chamber walls seemed to lean in closer, the carved faces around you caught in a muted tableau of watchful silence. The ochres and reds of the hieroglyphs pulsed gently as your hands moved, or rhythm echoing the unseen heart of the tomb. Your breath slowed further, each inhalation drawing in the sterile sweetness of the ancient incense mixed with dry stone and dust. The outside world faded beneath this smothering haze of stillness and ritual. After long moments stretched thin, you allowed your gaze to wander upward, tracing the fractured paintings overhead. A scarlet bird poised eternally in flight, frozen wings spread wide, contrasted against the cracked gold background. That single burst of color, so faded yet defiant, held a fragile promise, a shard of light caught in this mound of shadow. Your fingers itched to trace those lines, but you held firm, bound by the ritual's slow descent. The faint echo of footsteps approached, soft, cautious, unhurried. The distant temple bells resumed their hesitant toll, reluctant markers of time's passage. You stiffened, tuning every nerve to the faint rustling from beyond the thick door. The quiet was no longer empty, but filled with careful expectation. Cold wave rippled through the chamber. The air grew heavier, less forgiving, as the scent of old sandalwood and dried herbs deepened. You hesitated, the final stroke lingering as your patience met a rising tide of silent energy. Every muscle tensed lightly beneath worn skin as shadows thickened, crawling toward the small circle of flickering light that sheltered you. The sarcophagus seemed to breathe in the darkness. A vast and terrible stillness poised on the edge of bloom. Then, from deep within the stillness came a flicker, a soft brush, like the last breath of silk against stone. Your gaze sharpened on the shifting shadows near the base of the chamber wall, where darkness curled like smoke and whispered secrets just beyond reach. It was barely a movement, a tremor in the quiet fabric of the tomb. Something watched, patient and unresolved. The cold breath of the desert. Night seeped slowly in through the narrow slits, carrying with it the first faint stirrings of the unseen. Your fingers tightened around the sarcophagus wood, knuckles pale. Outside, the temple's distant murmurs fell away once more, swallowed by the thick stone and rising darkness. In that absolute quiet, you felt the fragile threshold resettle beneath your skin, an invitation or a warning, and you knew, with a terrible certainty, that what you had unlocked was only the beginning. You remained rooted in the dim chamber, every breath caught between the shifting shadows and the weight of silence. The jaw you coaxed open groaned, slowly, like a long-forgotten hinge finally stirred. The raw creak of wood meeting bone, pressing deep into your ears. Your fingertips hovered a moment longer over the cracked lips, feeling the brittle edge tremble beneath your touch. Brittle as a dried petal clinging to a withered stem. The scent of resin intensified, thick and clinging, pulling the past and present into a single dense fog that clouded your senses and slowed time's relentless flow. Cold dust swirled gently in the narrow shafts of light, twisting like ancient ghosts caught in slow dance. The air trembled, heavy with something unseen, waiting beyond the fragile curtain you had begun to lift. A faint pulse, almost too delicate to perceive, rippled beneath your skin, entwining with the steady but slow thud of your heart. Your gaze fixed on the faint gold leaf shimmering beneath the decay, as if an abyss of stories waited silently behind the faded hieroglyphs, tempting your curiosity and caution in equal measure. Your hands steadied and reached for the cloth bundle beside you. The rough linen, worn thin by centuries, whispered softness against your fingertips, a stark contrast to the harsh stone. Pressing into your knees, slowly with measured care, you trace the surface of the carefully folded cloth, its fabric dry and warm from the lingering heat of lamps long extinguished. The ritual demanded this slow reverence, a dance with time itself, and you obeyed, savoring each motion as a thread pulling you closer into the clandestine heart of this quiet mystery. Behind you, the muffled sounds of the temple shifted, an irregular murmur, the faint scrape of sandals across cold stone, all swallowed quickly by the dense stone walls. You swallowed hard, the chill of the air curling deep into your lungs with each breath, mingling with the stale perfume of incense and earth. Your fingers, slippery with oil and dust, lingered briefly on the wooden edge, bookending the sharp boundary between the living and the silent eternity you invited forth. The chamber seemed to pulse with a slow, breathing life of its own. Shadows stretched and recoiled, playing over your skin like whispered warnings. With a deliberate, almost tender rhythm, you lifted the small, curved blade again. Its edge was dull, but sacred, a slow-moving scalpel meant not for harm, but for unlocking the secrets carved into flesh and bone. As you traced the rim of the open mouth, gentle pressure caressed the dry, cracked surfaces. Coaxing and urging without haste, the sound of your heartbeat echoed faintly in your ears, a steady drum beneath layers of breath and silence. The incense smoke curled lazily upward, a spiral caught in the dim light, its scent a mingling of musk and forgotten time. You watched it drift, mesmerized by the slowness of its ascent, a counterweight to the unrest flickering just beyond the door. A delicate shiver traced down your spine as the air shifted again, just a whisper of movement, a fleeting rustle of ancient linen teasing at the edges of your awareness. The sensation was not quite fear, but an alertness, smoldering quiet embers. You lowered the blade and picked up the bowl of oil once more, thick and dark like liquid memory. Each dip of your fingers into the viscous mixture was slow, almost ritualistic, coating your skin in warmth that contrasted the biting chill around you. The first touch to the trembling lips was hesitant, reverent. The lips parted, cracked channels catching the oily sheen, glistening faintly under the wavering light. You moved deliberately, the slow massage of extinction itself, threading patience and presence through each tender stroke. The chamber walls seemed to lean in closer, the carved faces around you caught in a muted tableau of watchful silence. The ochres and reds of the hieroglyphs pulsed gently as your hands moved, a rhythm echoing the unseen heart of the tomb. Your breath slowed further, each inhalation drawing in the sterile sweetness of the ancient incense, mixed with dry stone and dust. The outside world faded beneath this smothering haze of stillness and ritual. After long moments stretched thin, you allowed your gaze to wander upward, tracing the fractured paintings overhead. A scarlet bird poised eternally in flight, frozen wings spread wide, contrasted against the cracked gold background. That single burst of color, so faded yet defiant, held a fragile promise, a shard of light caught in this mound of shadow. Your fingers itched to trace those lines, but you held firm, bound by the ritual's slow descent. The faint echo of footsteps approached, soft, cautious, unhurried. The distant temple bells resumed their hesitant toll, reluctant markers of time's passage. The thick door. The quiet was no longer empty, but filled with careful expectation. A cold wave rippled through the chamber. The air grew heavier, less forgiving, as the scent of old sandalwood and dried herbs deepened. You hesitated, the final stroke lingering as your patience met a rising tide of silent energy. Every muscle tensed lightly beneath worn skin, as shadows thickened, crawling toward the small circle of flickering light that sheltered you. The sarcophagus seemed to breathe in the darkness, a vast and terrible stillness poised on the edge of bloom. Then, from deep within the stillness, came a flicker, a soft brush, like the last breath of silk against stone. Your gaze sharpened on the shifting shadows near the base of the chamber wall, where darkness curled like smoke and whispered secrets just beyond reach. It was barely a movement, a tremor in the quiet fabric of the tomb. Something watched, patient and unresolved. The cold breath of the desert night seeped slowly in through the narrow slits, carrying with it the first faint stirrings of the unseen. Your fingers tightened around the sarcophagus wood, knuckles pale. Outside, the temple's distant murmurs fell away once more, swallowed by the thick stone and rising darkness. In that absolute quiet, you felt the fragile threshold resettle beneath your skin, an invitation or a warning, and you knew, with a terrible certainty, that what you had unlocked was only the beginning. You remained rooted in the dim chamber, every breath stretched thin between the cold stone beneath your knees and the brittle lips you had coaxed open. The faint groan of the jaw shifting echoed deep in your ears, a slow, deliberate sound that seemed measured in the ancient rhythm of the sarcophagus itself. Your fingertips hovered just above the cracked surfaces, feeling the dry edges crumble lightly, like the fragile bones of a moth's wing. The scent of resin thickened, a dense fog weaving history and presence into a single, heavy breath that settled deep into your lungs. Outside, the desert's breath slipped through the narrow slits again, carrying with it the faintest trace of warmth from the sun now fully risen, though the chamber clung stubbornly to its chill. Dust motes floated lazily in the shafts of light, twisting softly, as if caught in a ghostly dance long performed and never ending. You felt the rough grain of the sandstone pressing steadily against your palm, grounding you amidst the almost imperceptible stirrings around you. The steady pulse of your heart echoed softly beneath the lull of silence, a steady drum marking time in this suspended world. Slowly, your hand drifted from the sarcophagus to the small, ancient cup beside you, the vessel of oil, dark and thick as aged earth. You dipped your fingers with care, the sticky liquid cloaking your skin in a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold air. As you brought your hand back, time seemed to stretch thinner, every second dragging quietly forward. You rubbed the oily mixture gently into the mummy's lips once more, tracing each cracked fissure with reverence, as if weaving invisible threads between past and present. The scent, heavy with myrrh and dust, lingered stubbornly, filling your nostrils and curling softly around your lungs. Your breath slowed, drawing in the steady sweetness of incense, the smoky musk that refused to fade fully. Above you, faded paintings whispered their muted colors in the wavering light. Scarlet wings frozen mid-flight, golden banners fractured by time, but still radiant in their stubborn hold. On memory. Your fingers itched to follow their lines, but the ritual held you firm, every movement slow and deliberate, like a careful prayer cast in shadows. The chamber's silence shifted once more. From beyond the thick stone door, subtle sounds crept in, like hesitant whispers. The soft rustle of linen, a footfall cautious and measured, a faint murmur that wove itself into the ever-present background. These distant echoes felt both near and impossibly far, suspended like fragile threads in the slow stillness. You tightened your grip on the wooden edge of the sarcophagus, the worn grain biting lightly into your palm, a small tether anchoring you to the here and now. You paused, every sense stretched taut. The air grew heavier, thick with a slow, tingling tension that traced the line between patience and unease. Shadows seeped further into the corners, pooling like ink spilling over ancient stone. A faint shiver crawled up your spine, slow as the cold breath of the desert night slipping through the open slits. The chamber seemed to inhale deeply, the silence suddenly alive with something waiting just beyond perception. Your hand moved toward the small, curved blade resting nearby, a dull, sacred tool meant for unveiling, never harming. With a tenderness born of years spent in reverence, you traced the edge along the mummy's cracked lips, feeling the fragile brittleness beneath your touch. The scrape was barely perceptible, a whisper against thickened skin, and every nerve seemed stretched toward the sound of your own heartbeat, slow and steady beneath the weight of time. Incense smoke curled around your fingers like a languid serpent, drifting upwards in lazy, spiraling coils. The scent, a mixture of musk and forgotten secrets, wrapped itself like a blanket around your shoulders. The dim light flickered, casting the hieroglyphs into momentary relief. Faces carved with solemn grace, eyes eternally watchful on faded walls. The rhythm of the ritual tethered you, each motion a tether, binding past and future in this fragile moment of stillness. Soft footsteps approached again, slower now, laden with care and caution. The temple bells tolled lightly in the distance, hesitant markers of time's slow march, struggling to anchor the present to something familiar beneath the inevitability of change. You stiffened, every muscle alert beneath your linen sleeves. The scent of sandalwood deepened, mingling with the harsher tang of earth and sweat. The faintest breath of movement teased at the edges of your awareness. A rustle, a sigh rising from the walls themselves. Your fingers brushed once more over the oily lips, slow and reverent strokes that drew the ritual deeper into being. Time seemed to fold over itself. Every second, a small eternity. Each motion, a silent verse in a hymn older than memory. The chill in the air thickened to a near tangible presence, threading through your bones with quiet insistence. The sarcophagus sighed softly beneath your touch, wood and stone alive with unspoken motion. Then, just as your fatigue began to swell beneath the weight of waiting, a shift, a light flicker in the darkest corner, where shadows clung like cobwebs. Your eyes snapped to the movement, sharp and unblinking, straining to grasp the impossible. A shadow rippled, a twisting swirl darker than the surrounding gloom, as if the very air was folding over itself. Your breath caught, slow and deliberate, in the thickened silence. The stillness pressed closer, and you knew without doubt that the ritual's delicate balance had been disturbed. This chamber, steeped in centuries of whispered power, had opened more than just a mouth. Something had stirred, a slow, vast presence lingering just beyond your grasp, patient and watching in the gathering darkness. Your fingers, gripping the sarcophagus, tightened, knuckles pale under the strain, while the air chilled further, carrying a faint scent of earth, freshly turned, mingled with the lingering heat of ancient fires. The temple's distant hum faded to nothing, swallowed by the heavy stone and gathering night. And in that suffocating quiet, you felt the fragile threshold slip beneath your skin once more, no longer a whisper, but a coming storm poised on the edge of the next breath. You remained motionless, the thick air pressing quietly against your skin as the shadows pooled deeper beneath the low reliefs carved into the chamber walls. The slow creak of the jaw shifting beneath your hands resonated like the measured cadence of an ancient pulse, steady and insistent every inch of. The cracked lips, traced with reverence, held a fragile barrier between worlds, one your hands had begun to breach. The mixture of resin and myrrh clung stubbornly to your fingers, a weight both physical and spectral, mingling past and present in the humid tightness of the chamber. A breath, long and slow, slipped past your lips as you lowered your hand just enough to let the thick air wash over your cold skin. The brittle quiet around you seemed to deepen, and yet inside, a muted tension hummed low, irrevocable and patient, like the desert's own heartbeat beyond the stone walls. The golden ochre and faded reds of the hieroglyphs dimmed in the failing light, their stories half swallowed by centuries, as if the chamber itself exhaled in reluctant resignation. Your fingers moved toward the small bowl of oil once more, dipping slowly, each motion deliberate. The viscous liquid coated your skin, heavy with the warmth of compressed earth and the dense sweetness of ancient sap. Your hand rose, wavered, then brushed the uneven surface of the mummy's cheeks. The oil seeped slowly into brittle creases, softening silence with its thick, reluctant gloss. Beneath your touch, the dry flesh seemed to sigh, a whisper of unseen movement just beneath the surface, subtle as the brush of wind over sand. Time slit thin, the moments stretching and unfolding like low dunes blown gentle by the unseen breeze. Your breath grew shallow. Around you, the chamber's shadows swirled and danced with the faintest tremor, as though caught in an endless slow waltz with the fading light. Somewhere deep within the stone, a faint murmur began, a low, intricate the silence and into your bones. Outside, a faint warmth flooded briefly through the narrow slits. The desert sun breaking fully over the horizon, brushing the distant sands with golden fire that barely touched the thick cold here. The chamber resisted the day's heat, holding its cold breath, and you sank deeper into the worn ritual, your hands returning to the figure with tireless reverence. Each slow stroke was a quiet negotiation with time and memory, an unfolding of careful gestures, stretching between worlds. Your gaze drifted to the fractured frescoes above, the frozen scarlet wings of the sacred bird, held poised as if ready to swoop. The chipped gold leaf glimmered faint reassurance, a single shard of light poised to outlast decay. You resisted the urge to reach up, your fingers craving the cool smoothness of painted stone. But the tightening, like the slow coil of breath, caught deep in your chest. There was a soft shift again, this time a breath more distinct, slipping past the thick door that kept the outside world distant but present. The rustle of linen, cautious and unbroken by haste, brushed at the edge of your senses. Faint footsteps pressed gently against cold stone floor far away, moving with the deliberate purpose that matched your own measured tableau. The temple bells chimed irregularly, faint and hesitant, marking an elusive passage of time within the endless stillness. Your hands paused, resting lightly over the hardened lips, fingertips tracing the slow arc of cracked desiccation. The oily balm glistened like a slow-moving pool of dark honey, each touch a sacred whisper folded into the endless silence. The scent thickened, something like incense, earth, and the forgotten promises of long-dead faiths. Even the dust hanging in the shafts of light seemed dense with history, settling on your skin and mingling with your breath. The cold air stirred again, a subtle wave sweeping through the chamber, and the shadows shifted as though stirred by an unfelt breeze. The faintest rustle, almost silk against stone, unfolded near the farthest corner, where darkness pressed heavy against the grains of sand-covered blocks. Your senses tightened, the all-too-faint whisper weaving tension through your blood. The sarcophagus, ancient and enduring, seemed to hold its breath, wood groaning with slow patience under the weight of unseen watchers. You leaned closer, one hand steadying your balance, fingertips brushing the cool stone beside the sarcophagus. The grain beneath your skin was rough, a tactile reminder of time's irrepressible march. The air grew heavier, scented now with a bracing musk of sandalwood and dried herbs, bitter and metallic on your tongue. The temple murmurs dimmed once again, swallowed by the heavy stillness, pressing like a cloak around your shoulders. The soft gleam of the oil bowl caught your eye. You grasped it again, the thick liquid rippling slowly, motionless but alive in its slow descent with gravity. Your fingers moved with gradual confidence, coaxing the last of the balm onto the parched lips. The mouth opened imperceptibly wider, a barely noticed slip into something beyond mere flesh. As if the faint barrier you had crossed was thinning, inviting you to peer beyond. A shiver settled deep along your spine, slow and deliberate. The chamber's shadows pooled more completely now, their dark tendrils stretching toward you like ancient smoke, patient and unyielding. In the depths beneath the sarcophagus, you glimpsed a ripple, a flicker of movement, too subtle to name, a shifting in presence that did not belong to stone or air. Holding fast to the wooden edge beneath trembling fingers, you felt the first undeniable stir of something awakening. A soft, tremulous echo rose from the depths, a permanent whisper threading through the air like a fading heartbeat. The ritual was no longer yours alone. The silence thickened and cracked, the chamber exhaling a breath long held, as the veil between worlds trembled, poised to give way to what lay just beyond understanding. You remained there, rooted before the ancient sarcophagus, where shadows deepened and the silence wrapped itself around you like a suffocating shroud. The chill of the chamber seeped into your bones, slow and unrelenting, while your fingers lingered on the cracked edges of the mummy's lips, tracing the brittle contours that whispered secrets long buried. Each delicate movement you made was measured, careful to honor the quiet that pressed against your skin like an invisible weight, as if the very air was saturated with memories that refused to rest. The faint trace of resin thickened inside your nostrils, heavy and clinging, blending with the dust that stirred like restless spirits in the thin beams of light, trickling through the narrow slits high above. Time stretched and folded around you, each breath prolonging itself, caught between the cold stone beneath your knees and the fading gold leaf of the hieroglyphs that dared to hold on to their stories. You could almost feel the chamber's slow pulse beneath the rough wall, a rhythm steady and unyielding, calling softly to the parts of you that had begun to forget what patience truly meant. Your hand reached once again toward the small bowl of oil, its dark surface shimmering faintly, as if alive. You dipped your fingers with trembling care, the thick liquid coating your skin with a warmth that clashed against the persistent chill of the tomb. The scent unfolded, earthy, bitter, with a hint of something ancient and sacred. And you brought the oil slowly to the fragile lips, the first touch deliberate and endless. The dry flesh accepted the balm reluctantly, absorbing your touch as though each stroke wove a thread binding the past to the present. Outside the chamber, soft echoes sifted through the walls, distant footsteps brushing the cold stones with a reverence mirroring your own. The faint murmur of chanting hovered just beyond hearing, a ghostly melody wrapping the temple in an unseen cloak of devotion. A brittle piece of sand, caught in the darkness, drifting aimlessly in the narrow rays of morning light, flickered like a fragile star, struggling to remain alight in the encroaching gloom. The air held its breath, drawn tight with anticipation, as though all unseen eyes bore down on. The ritual unfolding silently within. Your fingers moved with the inevitability of seasons, rubbing and tracing the mummy's face, coaxing open the sealed mouth a fraction wider. The creak of ancient wood mingled with a low sigh that slipped past the stillness, faint but impossible to dismiss. It was a breath stretched long between worlds, a sound that unsettled the air and teased your senses in the dim glow. When your skin brushed the parched lips again, a subtle tremor pulsed beneath your touch, a ripple like distant thunder, enhancing the quiet tension that wrapped you tighter with every passing moment. Above, the fragmented vultures spread their wings in a frozen dance, their vibrant scarlet stained by the passage of forgotten centuries. Their gaze seemed fixed on you, a silent witness, trapped in time's relentless web. You resisted the urge to reach up and trace the paint, to connect with the color so defiant amidst decay, knowing that the ritual's slow rhythm demanded your full surrender. Instead, you turned your attention once more to the slow movements beneath your hands, each a slow breath in a long, quiet prayer. The chamber's atmosphere shifted anew. The distant temple bells began their hesitant cadence, irregular and fragile, threading a faint pattern through the dense air. Closer now, the soft rustling of linen brushed against stone, the faint scrape of a sandal, uncertain and deliberate, folding seamlessly into the web of sound and silence. Your breath caught, slow and deliberate, as the scent of sandalwood deepened, a rich, grounding note against the brittle dryness that filled your throat. The shadows thickened, reaching inward with slow patience, casting their ink-black fingers toward the shrinking pool of light where you knelt. Your hand sought once more the dull blade resting nearby, its weight familiar and sacred. The moment stretched when your fingertips brushed against the edge. A gentle pressure, a sacred caress tracing the perimeter of the opened mouth. The scrape was almost inaudible, but carried a resonance that seemed to hum inside your bones. The air grew dense with incense smoke, curling in languid spirals that drifted upwards like ghostly serpents trapped in gentle ascent. Their scent a mingling of musk, earth, and the whispered secrets of lost worlds. A sudden flicker at the periphery caught your eye, a movement subtler than breath, darker than shadow, where the walls met the floor in the chamber's farthest corner. Your heart slowed, every muscle tightened beneath your skin. The darkness shifted, not simply a play of fading light, but a deliberate dance of presence. Something watched you patiently, unseen but palpably. Fingers clenched the rough wood of the sarcophagus, grain biting through the thin skin, as a cold shudder traced its way along your spine. The thick night air curled through the narrow slits again, icy and unforgiving, carrying faint whispers of ancient deserts and forgotten fires. The distant temple melodies wavered and dropped away, swallowed by stone and shadow, leaving a stark quiet that seemed heavier than before, an invisible weight poised just beyond the fragile boundary you had broken. In that suffocating stillness, the cracked lips parted a whisper more. The slow, ancient door fully nudged open. A breath older than the sands, older than time itself, slipped quietly free. The chamber exhaled long and deep, carrying with it the fragile promise of awakening and the inexorable pull toward whatever waited in the dark that followed. You remained still, as the cracked lips parted a fraction more, a delicate sigh rippling through the heavy silence. The faint groan of the shifting jaw echoed under your skin like a slow, forgotten hymn, swelling and retreating with measured intent. Your fingers lingered reluctantly on the papery edges of the ancient mouth. The dry flesh brittled beneath your cautious touch, fragile as frost-thin leaves pressed between aged pages. The scent of resin thickened, weaving an almost palpable fog that curled around your throat and filled your lungs with the weight of centuries unspoken. Outside, the desert stirred unwillingly beneath the growing sun. Pale shafts of light streamed through the narrow slits high above, twisting languidly through motes of dust that danced like restless spirits caught in an eternal, slow pirouette. You felt the harsh grain of sandstone press firmly against your palm, a grounding anchor amidst a world that hovered between waking and dream. Each synchronized beat of your pulse became a quiet drum in this suspended realm, a metronome echoing across a gulf of time. Slowly, your hand moved to the small oil vessel by your side. The thick, ancient liquid clung to your fingers, a viscous memory bleeding warmth into your chilled skin with every deliberate stroke. As you returned your touch to the brittle lips, the balm spread like dark honey, reluctant but inevitable, seeping into the cracked crevices as if coaxing dormant life beneath layers of dust and silence. The scent of myrrh and earth, entwined with the stale incense hanging thick in the air, drawing your breath down in a slow, reverent inhale that made the shadows ripple softly against the walls. Your gaze drifted upwards, tracing the fractured wings of this sacred bird frozen eternally on the ceiling. Its scarlet feathers, once vibrant, now faded to a muted ember, held a silent promise, an ember nearly extinguished but stubbornly warm. The cracked gold backdrop shimmered under wavering light, like embers stirred by an unseen breath. You resisted the urge to reach up, to trace those ancient lines with your fingertips, bound instead by the invisible threads of duty weaving around you with solemn patience. From beyond the thick stone door, subtle sounds threaded into the dense quiet, the barely audible swoosh of linen brushing stone, slow footfalls soft and unbroken by haste, the gentle murmur of distant chants that drifted like phantoms across the temple halls. These delicate echoes seemed both near and impossibly distant, curling through the air like fragile tendrils of smoke, spiraling into a cold, unyielding sky. You tightened your grip on the worn wood beneath your hands, the rough grain biting softly into your skin, a tether drawing you firmly into the moment. The chamber's breath grew heavier, laden with a slow, insistent tension, stretching the fragile boundary between anticipation and dread. Shadows pooled thicker in the corners, their dark fingers stretching long and slow, pressing against the shrinking pool of flickering light where you knelt. A shiver traced down your spine, cool and unbroken as the endless desert night seeping through the slits above. The air, rich with sandalwood and dried herbs, grew denser, as if holding its breath alongside you. You reached again for the dull blade resting patiently nearby, its worn edge sacred in its stillness. Your fingers brushed over it with a tenderness that spoke of years spent in ritual reverence. Slowly, deliberately, you traced the rim of the newly parted lips, the scrape faint and deliberate, barely stirring the brittle flesh. The subtle sound was an intimate companion too. The rhythm of your heart, steady, unyielding, as though the sarcophagus itself held its breath alongside you. Incense smoke curled around your fingers in lazy, swirling loops, the heavy musk wrapping through the air like a slow-moving shroud, binding past and present beneath shadows carved by time. A sudden flicker drew your gaze to the far corner of the chamber. There, where darkness pooled heaviest, shadows moved with a quiet will, shifting not as form or shape, but as the slow pulse of something ancient, brushing against the edges of sight. You inhaled deeply, the weight of the chamber pressing against your ribs, and felt the unmistakable thrum of presence lingering just beyond the veil of perception. The sarcophagus trembled beneath your touch, an ancient heart awakening from deep silence. The thick night breath curled through the slits again, icy and relentless, carrying whispers of long-forgotten deserts and blackened fires beyond your reach. The distant murmur of temple voices faded, swallowed by stone and silence, until nothing remained but the chamber's dense darkness. Your fingers clutched the rough wood, knuckles whitening beneath the strain, as a small, impossible stirring flickered faintly beneath the cracked gold and ochre, unfolding like a slow bloom in the depths below. You lowered your hand slowly, the final balm traced across the lips, lingering like a sacred promise. A hush fell over the chamber, deep and total, an expectant exhale suspended between worlds. The brittle mouth quivered, opening just a whisper wider, as if drawn by an unseen breath. The ancient hinges groaned softly once more, a sound weighted with history and held back by tenuous will. Time itself seemed to draw taut, every molecule thickening. The shadows closed in with slow patience, your chest tightened, breath caught lightly in a web of suspended moments. And then, in the darkest corner, where stone met shadow, a movement flickered, a ripple shifting, deliberate and tense, like the stretching of unseen limbs beneath eternal dust. You couldn't tell if it watched you or beckoned, but the boundary twitched, a delicate fracture forming in the ancient silence. The ritual was no longer yours alone. Something had crossed the threshold, stepping with patient inevitability into the waiting dark, and in the sudden stillness that followed, you felt it, the breath of the tomb shifting, a patient, slow bloom that would not be contained by the closing shadows. You remained still, the soft creak of the jaw settling into quiet repose as the last whisper of motion trembled through the sarcophagus. The chamber exhaled a long, patient breath, the heavy air now softened, as if time itself had paused after this tentative awakening. Your fingers lingered briefly on the cracked wood, feeling the grain's faint warmth beneath your skin, a reminder of countless hands that had traced this ancient threshold before you. The fragile barrier between past and present, life and silence, had been nudged open and now rested in uneasy balance. Around you, the shadows softened their edges, receding ever so slightly under the growing light filtering through the narrow slits. Dust motes floated lazily, no longer dancing with restless urgency, but drifting gently, as if soothed by the changing air. The scent of myrrh and resin mellowed, weaving with the faintest trace of sun-warmed stone, creeping beneath the chamber's lingering chill. The stillness was no longer oppressive, but enfolding, a quiet embrace that invited calm rather than demanded vigilance. Outside the chamber, the murmurs of the temple resumed with steady grace, the distant footsteps no longer cautious, but purposeful, flowing through halls, alive once again, with whispered prayers and soft chants. You knew the ritual outside your chamber would soon fold into the larger rhythm of the temple's day. Yet here, in this secret heart of stone, your task hovered now between completion and surrender. Your hand, once trembling with the weight of ritual and uncertainty, moved with measured calm to the bowl of oil. The thick balm glistened under the faint light, rich and ancient, yet your touch was gentle, unhurried. With slow devotion, you traced the last oily stroke across the mummy's lips, sealing the final thread of connection. The dry flesh, stubborn and brittle, received your touch as one last gift, a bridge not only to what had been, but to what remained unspoken. Time again unraveled its tight weave, moments stretching wide, but softened in hue, the pulse of your breath, sinking to the slow cadence of the desert beyond. The warmth of dawn washed over the stone walls, imbuing every surface with a soft amber glow, a final kiss of sun before day fully dawned. The scarlet wings painted above seemed to flicker with renewed life, their frozen flight transformed into a quiet promise rather than a suspended lament. The shadows gathered at the chamber's edges, no longer fingers of ink, but gentle curtains drawing closed. As if closing a book, your hands had carefully turned to the last page. You let your gaze soften, resting on the hieroglyphs whose stories no longer rushed toward revelation, but settled, like old companions willing to sleep once more beneath your quiet vigil. The chamber's heartbeat slowed, a rhythm steady and sure, like the rise and fall of distant dunes beneath an endless sky. A final murmuring rustle drifted from beyond the heavy door, the shuffled footsteps of others, completing their own rites. Yet here, in this secluded sanctuary, the tension eased into the comfort of done work. The ancient sarcophagus stood silent, but no longer lifeless, a vessel now settled in its own vast and secret peace. You felt the story close gently around you, like a worn cloak, softened by time and patient hands. Your breath deepened, carrying the mingled scents of incense and earth, a fragrant blanket to cloak the quiet resolve that had steadied your spirit. The chamber's chill no longer bit, but soothed, and your limbs relaxed, yielding to the timelessness now holding you safe within its rhythm. You allowed your eyelids to grow heavy, the slow ebb of fatigue mingling with the deep calm that followed culmination. Outside, the temple bells tolled their steady call, not urgent or discordant, but a measured hymn to the passage of all things, both seen and unseen. The desert sun climbed steadily, precious light pouring into hidden crevices and ancient bones alike, bathing the world in unspoken assurance. In that moment, the fragile line between worlds held fast, a silent covenant between the living ritual and the resting dead. As your hands rested softly on the worn edges of stone and wood, a gentle stillness settled deep within your bones. The mysteries held by this tomb remained vast, but no longer urgent, folded carefully away beneath layers of dust and quiet reverence. You sensed the end here, not as a closing of doors, but as the steady opening of peace, a slow bloom of restfulness that embraced past, present, and future. Breath by breath, the lingering shadows finally softened to nothingness, and the chamber held only the gentle pulse of its own. Timeless heart, you rose slowly, each movement deliberate and calm, carrying with you the weighty grace of patience fulfilled. The door closed lightly behind you, the echo a soft farewell that promised return. But for now, closure reigned. The world outside beckoned with its warm expanse, but within you settled a tranquil certainty, a calm woven from the threads you had laid through stone, oil, and whispered prayer. This was the final moment, the quiet conclusion of a journey through shadow and silence, where the ancient breath mingled softly with the living. And so, as your footsteps faded into the stillness of the waking temple, the chamber's story folded gently into the unfurling day, a peaceful rest, a story told and softly sealed. Sleep now, beneath the vast and watchful sky, where the sands hold secrets with tender patience, and the night's breath carries you gently forward.